Greetings and salutations, gamers. My name is Kyle, also known as GamersWeekend, and welcome back to another Dark Souls tier list. A long time ago, we did, or not really a long time ago, but a while ago, we did a Dark Souls 1 tier list, and you guys seem to enjoy that quite a bit. And I promised I'd do a Dark Souls 2 one, and it may have taken a while, but we are finally here. Speaking of the Dark Souls 1 list, I also may or may not have gone on for like 5 minutes before we actually started placing bosses, and I promise not to do the same thing again because unlike Dark Souls 1, we have 41 of the little bastards to rank. So I'm going to make this pretty quick. But Dark Souls 2 is probably my second favorite Souls game in the series. I'd say it's probably tied with Elden Ring for my second favorite game in like the FromSoft franchise. Keep in mind, I haven't played Bloodborne or Sekiro yet, so can't really judge those, but like I'd say that Dark Souls 2 and Elden Ring are probably tied with each other, with Dark Souls 1 probably being my favorite, and then Dark Souls 3 sitting not too far behind Elden Ring, but like it just unfortunately got the short end of the stick for me. That being said, I am one who will admit that not all of the boss fights in Dark Souls 2 are super amazing. In fact, I went ahead and added a 6th tier called Needs Work because I feel like we're going to need to add an additional tier to really differentiate between some of the lower tier bosses, because I don't feel like every bad boss needs to be deleted from the game. I just feel like there are some bad bosses that definitely need a lot of love before they're really going to be anything special. That being said, I'm going to quickly go over all these tiers and what they mean for me. So like when I put a boss in this tier, what specifically do I mean when I put them in that tier? I'm going to go through these really fast. So just amazing. If I put a boss in the amazing tier, that essentially means that I'll do an entire playthrough just to experience that boss again. These are the bosses that I often look back on the game and go, yeah, that was probably one of the greatest parts of that game. Bosses that are in the great tier are bosses that I won't necessarily replay the game for, but like when I remember they're in the game, I really look forward to them. Like these are bosses that I'm going to look forward to fighting, but not necessarily will start an entire playthrough just to see like how the fight will go. A boss that's still good is a boss that's more than an obstacle to me. It actually still functions as a boss. I just don't necessarily have any strong opinions about it. It's a functional boss and it's a good boss. That being said, it's probably got one or two glaring flaws with it. The meh bosses are the ones that I feel pretty much nothing about. Like, if a boss goes into meh, that means I guess they're fine. Like, they've got flaws, they might have one or two things going for them. They're just kind of like the neutral. Needs work is when we get into the territory of a boss is starting to have some flaws that are really glaring. These bosses probably still have potential to go way up higher on the list, but they need some extra work done to them before they're going to get any higher. And then delete tier is pretty plain and simple. I want the boss out of the game. I feel like the boss contributes nothing, or I feel like that there shouldn't be a boss there. Just plain and simple, delete tier. I don't want it there. And finally, the last thing I want to bring up is, I know there was a little bit of confusion about this in the last ranking video about whether or not I was considering lore, whether or not I was considering boss run-ups and stuff like that. I'm going to try my best to not really talk about boss run-ups because I think that's a little unfair to the boss itself. I think the run-up to the boss should be judged separately from the encounter itself. And when it comes to lore, I'm only really going to count lore as like a plus. It's kind of like the extra credit thing. Like if the lore for the boss is really cool and I really like the lore, then like sure, they'll get extra points. But if a boss has like necessarily bad lore, or like a boss is like their lore just isn't there and it's not doing it for me, I'm not really going to count it against them, because I think lore is always something that adds to a fight, but I don't think the lore of these games ever detracts from them. With maybe the exceptions of like final bosses. Like if you're a really late game boss or you have super narrative significance, then I might count your lore against you, but we'll probably talk about things like that when we get there. And starting us off, we have Nazca. And I think Scorpionus, I think it's Nazca, right? Scorpionus Nazca would probably go probably sits at the cusp between still good and great for me. I'm gonna go and put her into great for now. We might move her later, but we'll see how the other bosses stack up. Nazca is Quelaag, but again, except this time, instead of a chaos spider lady, she is a sorceress scorpion lady. And being honest, she might be the inferior version of Quelaag, but Quelaag was already really good, so obviously I'm gonna really like Nazca. I think she functions as a pretty cool boss. I really like her like burrow mechanic where she digs under the sand and you have to stand on like the little stone plinth or whatever, the little stone platform in order to avoid the attack. I also think it's cool that you can cut off her tails. There are some ways to cheese her pretty badly, but even despite that, I think she's still a pretty fun encounter. Definitely a memorable one. Next up is going to be the Pursuer, and Pursuer probably going to be our first amazing tier boss. Pursuer is actually a pretty damn good boss. First of all, music. Pursuer theme is absolutely awesome. Second of all, he is probably the best early game boss when it comes to Dark Souls 2. There's something so intimidating about him, and even though I feel like I have a good grasp of his moveset, and it is pretty easy to avoid his moves, there's something just so menacing about him to like, even when you're good at Pursuer, he still kind of feels like a dangerous boss to go up against. Like, I always feel like I have to be cautious against him, and that's a really good feeling. And then there's also like ways you can manipulate him into like using the ballistas to take him out, which I think is a really clever idea. It kind of illustrates this feeling with the ballistas that like you're facing a boss that's too big for you and you have to use the ballistas to get an advantage. But even if you can't use the ballistas or they end up getting destroyed, it is still totally viable to fight him head on. I think if Pursuer was anywhere other than early game, he would probably be lower on the list, but I think he makes for a perfect early game boss. Next up is going to be, I think this one is Ava, because Lud and Zalin are here. So we're going to go with Ava. I think Ava is actually going to be another one that we're going to put in the amazing tier. We'll rearrange who goes where in the tiers a little more closely later. But Ava is a really cool boss. I think she was the perfect introduction to the Ivory King DLC. Heading out and finding this invisible boss among the storm that's like nearly impossible to detect, but it is entirely possible, as far as I know, to defeat invisible Ava. It just makes this really cool, like, thematic feeling, or not thematic, but like it sets up a cool storyline of you having to go out of your way to find the eyes in order to see her and fight her. And just as an animal boss, I think Ava is actually done really well. If you had to ask me what my favorite like animal boss is throughout the series, that would be between Dark Souls 1 and 2. That would be Rat Authority, Sith, and Ava. Like, those are the ones that I'm mainly referring to, the ones that are purely bestial. Ava would definitely sit at the top. And I think just the purpose she serves is like the introduction to Aleum Lois. Yeah, I think Ava is just like a perfect introduction to that DLC and is a pretty fantastic boss all around. And then we have Aldia. Oh boy, Aldia. Where do I want Aldia to be? I like Aldia, but I don't know if I would consider Aldia still good per se. I'm going to put Aldia in the meh tier, I think. I think Aldia is probably going to end up being the king of the meh tier. The thing about Aldia is I think Aldia's lore is actually incredible. I love everything about Aldia's lore and the first sin and everything like that. That being said, Aldia as a final boss, as a secret final boss, I really like in concept. Like, there's a lot of things around Aldia that I really, really like. But the fight really is kind of lackluster. I think some of his attacks are really cool. Like, the trees that come out of the ground are a lot of fun. The swarming fireballs is really cool. And I'm actually not even like, I don't really mind the fact that he teleports around the arena. I know that does bother some people, but that's not even what really bothers me. I think the thing that bothers me the most about Aldia is one thing that bosses really get a bad rep for in Dark Souls 2 is this concept of your turn, my turn, which I think is totally false for a lot of bosses. I think that people really like overestimate how your turn, my turn Dark Souls 2 is. I don't think it's nearly as bad as people make it out to be. That being said, Aldia is literally the your turn, my turn boss incarnate. Like when the fire turns on, it's his turn. When it's off, it's your turn. And it's a bit annoying, to be honest, more than it is like actually fun to play around. I think the fire wouldn't be too bad if it didn't negate damage, but then that would just mean he's food for every mage build in the game. So I think he's got a lot of like really cool buildup. There's cool story, and some of his attacks are visually really cool. Again, like the tree type attacks I think are fantastic. But there's just some things about him, like overall the fight is still pretty lacking. He's more so a victory lap than he is a true final boss. I don't think he needs a ton of development in order to make him a good boss, but I think he's still lacking enough to not quite make it into the still good tier. Super awesome lore, though. Really like him. And if it isn't another high tier, man, we're getting a lot of these high tiers early, which is starting to concern me that the later half of this video is going to be pretty negative. Sir Elon, probably the best fight in the game, if not the second best fight in the game. I mean, Sir Elon is just a fantastic fight. He's that, first of all, the room he's in with like the mirrored floor is just awesome. He probably has one of my favorite arenas in all of FromSoft. He also just feels like a really fun boss to fight. He's a very rapid attacking boss, can combo really well. Like, it's kind of got that pursuer feeling where it's like, even if you know the attack pattern, you never truly feel like you're safe against this boss. He always feels like he's a present danger to you, and I love that about him. Another thing that I think that I really like about him is he doesn't quite feel too fast to be in Dark Souls 2, but he certainly feels like he is in the top echelons of speed when it comes to Dark Souls 2 bosses, which I think is a good thing because he is an optional super boss, essentially. And I've always been a fan of optional bosses having unfair advantages against you. Like, a super boss should feel like it has an advantage on you. It should feel like it has the leg up, because that's the idea of a super boss. And that just makes it feel so much better when you beat them. And I think that's one of the things that Sir Elon does so perfectly. That's one of the things I love so much about Sir Elon, is you can see the skill and the speed and the way he fights, and it feels like you're fighting the uphill battle, and you're looking for every small advantage you can against him. And when you actually beat him, it is such a good feeling. Also, he has the seppuku animation if you manage to do him hitless, which is a pretty awesome Easter egg, in my opinion. I think most people would agree on that one. So next we have, oh boy, maggieson congregation. I'll be honest, maggieson congregation are probably gonna be the first in deletes here. I don't remember what challenge it was. I think it was Miracles Only I was playing, and I remember I was going through, what's the name of that area? Is it the, are they technically Brightstone Cove? I think they're technically Brightstone Cove. They're either Brightstone Cove or Doors of Pharos. I'm pretty sure they're in Seldora, though. I remember I was going through Brightstone Cove, and I was already preparing for Freya. Like, I'd beaten Nazca, and I was preparing for Freya. And I remember I was doing the challenge, and I was going through, and I saw a fog wall, and it was like I got hit by a flashbang for a second. And it was like, there's a boss here? What? And then, like, it suddenly came like flooding back into my memories that Prowling Mangus and Congregation exist. And it was like, oh yeah, those guys. Pyromancy only I actually fully remembered them, but like Miracles only Dark Souls 2 was still being like pretty fresh into my brain and research and everything that I totally forgot of their existence. I think even going into the Let's Play, I forgot that they existed, and I've played this game quite a few times. As to why they're delete and not needs work, I don't even really like the concept of this fight. Some people, including myself, are pretty guilty for calling this just worse Deacons of the Deep. However, I think there's a different boss on this list that actually earns that title. I think this boss is literally just a room full of mobs, and you've got to clear it in order to move on. And they gave it all a red health bar, and that's not really fun, you know? That's just kind of whatever. I honestly can't think of a whole lot of reasons that FromSoft even created these guys. Like, maybe they were supposed to be a bigger and better boss fight, but I don't think even the remnants of whatever that concept was should have stayed in the game. They probably should have just been removed. Next up, we've got the Ancient Dragon. Ancient Dragon is gonna go to me into needs work, I think. Ancient Dragon is a memorable fight, and he does count as one of those like late game optional bosses that kind of bridges like end game Dark Souls 2 to late game DLCs, you know, stuff like that. All of that being said, Ancient Dragon really does not have much of a moveset. He doesn't really do a whole lot. And I understand that's supposed to simulate that he's an old dragon that's barely able to move, but I think there was a better way to go about it. I myself don't necessarily know what specifically I would do to his moveset in order to change it up. I will say the fact that his fire will very often double hit you, because by the time you get up, the hitbox of his flame is still lingering. And that will often be more than enough damage to kill most playthroughs if you're not spec'd into fire resistance. So that is a bit annoying, and I wish there was some way we could fix that. Maybe if instead it was like tick damage instead of like a massive hit of fire. That would probably help. Overall, I think Ancient Dragon is definitely a necessary boss fight. He's really cool to the lore. But he really needs help. Like this boss needs some more love before it feels complete, because the way it is, it kind of feels whatever, you know, especially with how massive his health bar is. Also, I don't think I need to point this out, but just in case anybody's thinking this, when I say a boss needs love, or like I feel like a boss would be better with more dev help, I'm not necessarily like saying or expecting anybody to ever fix anything in this game. I'm just speaking in like hypothetical what I could fix. I don't think I need to say that, but just for the one or two people that be like, well, you know, nobody's ever gonna like do a true remake and actually fix things, as much as I'd love if they would. I know, it's just like hypothetically speaking, if I was given the opportunity to fix something, this is how I would probably go about it. And I think Ancient Dragon is one of those bosses that definitely needs a bit of help. Next up is the gargoyles. Ooh. I think gargoyles are going to go into meh. I'm trying to even remember what they're called. Are they just called Belfry gargoyles in this game? I think they're called the Belfry gargoyle. Hold on, let me look. Yeah, Belfry gargoyles is what they're called. Yeah, they're kind of whatever, to be honest. I don't necessarily look forward to fighting them. They kind of just feel like a boss that's on the list that I have to cross off. I mean, they share a lot of similarities with Dark Souls 1 gargoyles, but the problem is that they feel more so like a collection of enemies, kind of like Prowling Magus and Congregation. The only difference is at least the idea is a bit cooler. Like, it's this swarm that slowly grows as the fight goes on. It is health-based, so like if you play your cards right, you can keep the swarm under control, which I think is actually a plus. That means that there's actual like ways to keep the boss fight methodically under control. That being said, fighting the gargoyles isn't necessarily a super fun task. They're a fun little callback, but again, I often forget about these bosses' existence. Like, if I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, I want to play Dark Souls 2 today, these bosses are literally never on my radar until I start the game and think, if I do all bosses, what do I have to cross off my list? That's probably why, like, in my challenge videos, the 2 ones that I have for Dark Souls 2 already, I fight gargoyles so late. It's just like, at that point, I'm thinking, okay, my build is starting to come together. What do I have to check off my list? And then I look on the list and go, oh, right, gargoyles, they exist. Man, we still got a ways to go. That's okay, though. Covetous Demon. Covetous Demon, I can make short, sweet, and simple. I'm going to put him in needs work, but just know that he sits between needs work and delete, because I feel like this thing would be better if it literally wasn't a boss. He is like a mini boss or like just a big enemy in the Ivory King DLC, and I think that is the perfect use for Covetous Demon. He is not deserving of the title of a boss. He literally should just be a large enemy, and that's it. So I'm going to put him in needs work because I don't want him removed from the game. However, I do want him removed from the boss list. Just make him a big enemy. That's all you have to do with him. Dark Lurker. Oh, man. Dark Lurker is either going to be in amazing or great. I think he's better than Nazca. Might be in the amazing tier. Let's put him in great for now, and then we'll see how the other great bosses stack up, and we might move him up. But Dark Lurker is Pinwheel done right. He has the kind of clone mechanic that Pinwheel does, but the difference is that the clones actually feel truly threatening. He's late enough into the game to the point where he's given a health bar that actually physically matters. It's also nice that you can fight him before the Looking Glass Night, like before you really start to get into the mid to late game Dark Souls 2 that Dark Lurker is available, because I think that's when he is most comfortably a challenge in the game, which is really nice because you're forced to fight Pinwheel in Dark Souls 1 pretty much towards the late game, because nobody early game is going to go down into the catacombs unless you're an experienced player or a speedrunner. So yeah, I think Dark Lurker is pretty well balanced. I think it's pretty awesome that we have a magic using boss that uses magic in a lot of fun and creative ways. I think the arena is perfectly sized, and his lore is also, like, it's not anything amazing, but I mean, it's pretty fun. It's pretty cool. Also, boss design, he just looks awesome. So yeah, Dark Lurker, he might be getting an upgrade to amazing. We'll see in a bit. The Demon of Song. And it took all of my willpower to not replace the D and the S there. I'll let you do the math in your own head if you're really curious. Anyways, Demon of Song is another boss whose existence I forget. Now, is it because he is not a fantastic boss, or is it because he's at the end of Shrine of Amana, which is way more memorable than he is? That remains to be seen, but I don't think Demon of Song, God, I want to say the other thing so badly. I need to get off this boss before I slip. I think Demon of Song is a pretty whatever boss fight. That whole spiel I was going on about Pursuer and Sir Elon, where they always feel menacing and I always feel threatened by them, it's the opposite for this boss. I literally never feel threatened by him. I think the design is kind of weird, but I like it. Like, I feel like his boss design is cool, but his moveset is just kind of jank. I don't know. He needs a little bit of love before he's anything good. I just think he needs a little bit of love to make him a little bit more memorable, and maybe some slight variations to his moveset. I don't think he needs work tier necessarily, because he still functions, just doesn't function amazingly well. Next up, we have the Dragon Rider boss fight. And I'm going to put Dragon Rider in... I think I'm going to put Dragon Rider in great. And I'm starting to notice the still good tier hasn't been filled out yet, but those bosses are coming. Don't worry, they're coming. I think Dragon Rider is a fairly memorable boss fight. It's cool that you can take the time to fix his arena to make it so you have more room to fight him. And I think he does serve as a really good early game boss, just like Pursuer. The difference is I think Dragon Rider is the easier boss, which does make sense if you think about progression-wise. Dragon Rider's attacks, though, are really well telegraphed, but are still threatening enough so that it kind of helps early players learn the game a bit. It's also pretty fun that you can bait him off the side. Like, you can either increase the arena size to, like, decrease the challenge you're going to have avoiding his attacks, so you're not stuck in danger close and constantly threatened being shoved off the side. But at the same time, you can, with enough skill, just bait him off the arena, which I think is pretty fun. That being said, I think Dragon Rider functions really well as an early game boss fight, and since I already see them down here, we're going to have our next Elite tier boss, the Dual Dragon Riders. I think there's supposed to be a callback to ONS. I'm not entirely sure though, because I think Dual Dragon Riders is pretty much just garbage. It's fighting one Dragon Rider in a pretty standard arena while the second one shoots at you. That is not inherently fun. That is just copy paste, but not done right in the slightest. I don't like these two. Get rid of them. We don't need them. They are literally another boss that I can never remember that they're even in the game half the time. Hey, and finally, we get to Duke's Dear Freya, or as I like to call her, the Duke's Dumb Refrigerator. Freya is going to be our first still good boss. I think Freya's design is actually pretty fine. I think that the mechanic about her only taking damage on one of her two heads is a fairly decent idea. I also feel like this boss can be fairly threatening in the right situations. And I think for a spider boss, she's done pretty well, at least a giant spider boss. That being said, she is, once you understand her moveset and how to really fight her, she's not really going to be much of a threat. Like, once you understand how everything about her boss fight works, you know, using a torch to avoid the spiders and really just switching between heads, staying close, blah, 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 it's really easy to diffuse this boss fight. So I don't think that she's necessarily a great fight, which may sound weird because you can kind of do the same thing to Nazca, but at least with Nazca, she still feels a bit, I don't know. To me, I think Nazca feels a bit more fun. Freya is just like, yeah, she's fun, but like, I'm not necessarily going to look forward to Freya. She's more so a goal, and a goal that I'm happy to achieve. So I mentioned earlier that there was a boss that was quite a bit like Deacons of the Deep in this game, and I actually think that belongs to Royal Rat Vanguard, who I think is going to go in the needs work tier. I know I tend to crap on the Deacons of the Deep quite a lot during streams. I also do it a lot during Discord calls, so if you ever talk to me about just Dark Souls 3 in Discord, I tend to crap on Deacons a lot. That being said, I don't think Deacons are that bad. I think they are essentially an evolution of the Royal Rat Vanguard, which is, I think, a good concept. Like, conceptually, it is a good fight. I don't necessarily think that it is a fully functional fight. I think the mechanic needs more development before I can really respect this fight, because at the moment, it's just rat killing simulator. Wait till the rat with a health bar shows up and then kill that one. So I don't think that this is a bad boss and it needs to be deleted. I think it was a boss concept that needed to be developed more, and FromSoft actually has already done that work, and they gave us Deacons, which is essentially the same thing to some extent, but done a little bit better. So I think I'm going to put Vanguard at the top of needs work because I think it is a mechanic that is on the precipice of forming a decent boss fight. It's just not quite there. Next up, we have Alana. I'm really torn between putting Alana between great and still good. I think for now, we're going to put Alana at the bottom of great. Alana in concept is really fun, and I actually do look forward to fighting Alana. The only problem is I think the Velstat she summons might be a tad bit too strong. I think that Velstat that she can pull out needs to be toned down just a tad bit, and it would probably make the boss fight a little more entertaining. I think if she had a wider variety of summons as well, that could probably also help the fight in being not so stagnant. That being said, Alana is, even with all that being said, she's still a pretty fun encounter, at least in my book. I think that Alana needs a little bit of love before she really sits on the echelon of all these upper boss fights that I put in Amazing. But at the same time, she is fun enough to where I will look forward to and prepare for her encounter. I just think she needs a little bit of love. Even though I've given suggestions, I'm not even sure if that's what I want out of her. I'm just kind of spitballing here. She needs a little bit of love. I don't know what it is, but I think if there was just an extra little bit of care put into her, she probably would be one of the greatest bosses in the game. But something about her just feels very slightly unpolished. So she doesn't quite make it into the amazing tier. I think she's still clinging on to great, but I could maybe be convinced to move her down to the top of the still good tier. Okay, I don't know if this decision is going to be controversial or not, but I'm tempted to put Executioner's Chariot in amazing tier. Like, I love Executioner's Chariot. This is probably one of the 3 most memorable fights from vanilla Dark Souls 2. Executioner's Chariot is actually so much fun. Even if the skeletons and necromancer are a tad bit annoying, I can't tell you what it is, but there's just something so cool about this fight. One of the coolest ways that you can make a gimmick fight is to make it to where the gimmick is not only a hindrance, but when used correctly can help you so much. And that's something that Executioner's Chariot does perfectly. You can use, with some good timing and positioning, you can use that chariot to your absolute advantage to decimate the skeletons. The chariot is both a tool for your undoing as well as a tool for your success, and that's such a cool balance that you can work around. Not to mention that his boss design just looks freaking awesome, and the cutscene is great as well. I'm a little sad that he's an optional boss too, that almost has nothing that you get out of killing him, because he's such a fun boss. I love Executioner's Chariot. That being said, I can't deny that there are times when the skeletons and the necromancers can be annoying. I'm not allowed to deny that, but at the same time, he's so cool. Flexibile Sentry is a weird one. I kind of want to put the boss encounter for Flexibile Sentry in still good. I think he makes for a cool early game boss, and I think it's a cool idea to where you can choose which half of the body you want to fight, which moveset you think is going to be easier to interact with your build is pretty it's a pretty fun mechanic to play with. I also think that the idea of the water slowly rising in the room is a fun mechanic. That being said, it never really comes up. In fact, some people who are watching this video may not even know that mechanic exists. The longer you're in Flexibile Sentry's boss room, the water slowly rises, and eventually it'll get waist deep and will restrict your movement. So you're almost kind of on the clock while you're fighting Flexibile Sentry. That being said, I think most of us didn't notice because he's kind of got the pinwheel problem where he just doesn't have enough health. I don't know why, but I feel like in every playthrough I do, I just end up decimating this boss. This boss ends up becoming a next to nothing, which is kind of sad because I think conceptually there's a lot of things that are really cool with him. So I don't know, maybe he's meh, maybe he's still good. I think he still is on the still good tier because he is cool for an early game boss, and I think his arena, the arena's mechanic as well as the arena size is perfect. I think that lore-wise, he's got the smallest of bonus points, and I mean the smallest of bonus points for just what he is and where you're headed. He functions. The lore functions in a pretty decent way. I don't feel nothing towards this boss, but I almost feel nothing towards this boss. So he's gonna sit and still good. Oh, Vendrick. I almost want to put Vendrick in meh. So hear me out on this one. I think Vendrick suffers from the same problems that Ancient Dragon does. That being said, I almost feel like I can excuse the lack of moveset and the weirdly clunky movement for Vendrick, just because it's one of those fights where I feel like the story really does matter. And the fact that you're fighting this far past hollowed out king, this supposed king that was supposed to be a hero that's depressed and who's been defeated and now roams in his own depression until the end of eternity or until somebody finally puts him down. I think that actually kind of works for him a little bit. That being said, I don't think he's still a great boss fight. I don't even know if I would still consider him a good fight. I think, honestly, I'd almost call him a bad boss fight, but I almost feel like that's a good thing. I almost feel like I'm not conquering a boss when I fight Vendrick, but I'm finally laying him to rest. That's kind of the vibes I get with Vendrick, and I think the lack of moveset and stuff like that actually does contribute to the boss. He might almost be in the still good tier just because of that feeling, but he's still dangerous enough to like actually cause damage. I don't know. He might end up going to the meh tier, but I'm going to put him in still good for now because this boss does have a lot of issues, but I think in my mind that almost more contributes to him than it does detract from him. Next up is going to be the Fume Knight. Let's go, brother. Fume Knight gonna go straight to the top, right next to Sir Elon. These two can be somewhat interchangeable, but Fume Knight is just awesome. Probably, he might be like one of my favorite bosses across all of FromSoft. I think that Elden Ring definitely has like 2 or 3 of my top 5 bosses. Probably my top 3 are all Elden Ring bosses. But that being said, Fume Knight constantly contests them. Same with Sir Elon. Fume Knight is just such an awesome fight. He goes from that iconic phase 1 with the straight sword, great sword, like mixture. And I know it's supposed to be like an ultra great sword and like a great sword in the offhand, but I've always looked at him and thought, yeah, that's one hand is dex and the other is strength. It's like Fume Knight feels like the pinnacle of what your character should be striving to achieve in Dark Souls 2. He feels like the pinnacle of physical builds, a master of both dexterity and strength. And when you finally get him to his phase 2 and take him on, and he finally gets serious, then he starts mixing up with greatsword as well as magic. Just on the magic department, on the physical department, in the lore, just everything about this guy. The arena is great. The mechanic with the smelter wedges is fun, I guess. I mean, that's probably the only thing that it's like, I almost wish it didn't exist just so I didn't have to pay attention to it, but I understand why it's there. Everything about this boss, though, Fume Knight feels like the pinnacle Dark Souls 2 character, and that's his advantage on you and what makes him a super boss. He is what you should strive to be, and defeating him and conquering him in a way makes it feel like you are the champion of this game. Everything about Fume Knight, I think there are a lot of people that would agree with me that Fume Knight is absolutely the top tier of Dark Souls 2. And there are days when I question whether or not I would prefer Fume Knight over pretty much every Dark Souls 1 boss. I love fighting against Fume Knight. Raim is just an absolute chad. Also, the mechanic where if you wear Velstat's armor in his boss fight that he gets so pissed off he goes straight to phase 2 is a really nice touch. I really enjoy that. The last giant, gonna go ahead and go right next to Freya in the still good tier. He's an early game boss. I always feel like Last Giant is that boss that introduces you to what bosses are. Unfortunately, he just doesn't feel like much of a boss. If Dragon Rider's attacks were telegraphed, then last giants were engraved in stone and sent to you from 2,000 years in the past. The last giant really doesn't pose a lot of threat, which is why he's in the still good tier and not great. I think if there was still some kind of like menacing ability to him, then I would probably put him higher. That being said, I think he still functions fairly good as a first boss. You have to think that Dark Souls 2 kind of lacks a tutorial boss, and I've always seen and a lot of people I think would always see the last giant as Dark Souls 2's tutorial boss. And when you think of him like that, he actually fits in a pretty good spot. That being said, you technically don't have to fight him until you get to late game, and if you do that, like, then I guess he really suffers from pinwheel problem, but I think he's positioned in the perfect place to where pretty much every early game playthrough is going to take him on when they're supposed to. So, I don't know. I think Last Giant is actually a still pretty good boss. I think he does lack that threat potential, but lore-wise and just overall, still a pretty good boss. I have fun steamrolling him. Alright. This is the boss that everybody's probably going to disagree with me on this video. Even more so than Vendrick. I almost want to put the Gank squad in the great tier. Still good might... you know, I guess I'll put them in still good. I actually like the Gank squad. I know a lot of people really don't. Because Kyle, they're essentially just 3 NPC human characters. And you know what? In concept, everything I've said about NPC boss fights probably detracts from the Gank squad, but I don't know. There's something about them that I enjoy. I think they're just so fitting for the area they're in. There's something about this boss that feels right. Like, if you were ever going to do an NPC mixture boss fight in a game, I think this is the way to do it. I think this is about as good as just straight up human character NPC boss fight. This is about as good as it's ever going to get, which is not saying a lot considering it's going to, like, that concept peaks out at still good tier. But as much as I hate the concept of this fight, I think it's executed pretty well. There's just something about it that I think is done really well. The arena is also really interesting and makes for the fight a lot more dynamic. And the area that they're in does kind of almost beg for you to do multiplayer. They definitely feel like a bonus boss. They are not even necessary to complete the, what is it? The Sunken King DLC. They're not even required to complete the Sunken King DLC. They are a bonus boss that is in content that is entirely optional, which I think is the perfect place for them. Guardian Dragon. I almost want to put Guardian Dragon in needs work, because he probably still needs work, but I guess the boss functions. It's a good enough dragon fight to where I would say, yeah, he's alright, I guess. Like, it's one of those bosses that does have enough present threat to where I would say, you know, I don't really blame you for dying to this boss. He is threatening enough to where he can catch a player off guard and kill them. At the same time, though, like, God, this boss needs help. The Birdcage Arena do be pretty sick, though. I'm not going to lie. It's also really tragic that, you know, if there's one thing I don't like about Scholar of the First Sin, it's that they put one of these in Hades Tower of Flame, because I feel like that detracts from the boss even more. But it doesn't help that in both versions of the game, you fight this boss and then go into an area where the boss is copy and pasted either 3 or 4 times. That just feels straight up bad. I know it might be hypocritical for me to judge the boss based on what's immediately preceding it, if I'm not going to count the lead up to the boss, but I don't know, man. Hellkite just retroactively, Hellkite does not even, why am I calling him Hellkite? Guardian Dragon does not feel great. The Lost Sinner. I guess Lost Sinner's pretty cool. Would I put Lost Sinner above the Gank squad and Freya. I like the Gank squad more than I like Sinner, but I like Sinner. I think I'll put Lost Sinner there. She's pretty cool. Decent little swordplay boss fight. There is technically the torch mechanic, where like if you don't light up the room, it's hard to lock onto her. But the mechanic doesn't matter too much because Lost Sinner doesn't have a lot of ranged attacks really, so it doesn't matter that much. She's a pretty cool boss thematically. Lore is okay. Typically, I see this as the first lord that most players are going to go after. And she feels all right. I definitely don't feel nothing. I think I feel more positive about her than I do negative. That being said, she doesn't have like a ton going for her. She's just kind of like a box standard swordplay boss fight. Which, I mean, like, it's a good swordplay boss fight, but it definitely feels pretty box standard. So I can't really give her a ranking above anything still good. Something about Lost Sinner just feels very cookie cutter. Not copy paste, but very cookie cutter. Ah, yes, Ludden's-Allen. All right. Let it be known that I'm the weird guy that likes the Frigid Outskirts. I think the Frigid Outskirts is a cool idea for an area. I think the only problem with the Frigid Outskirts is the fact that the reindeer are so tanky. If they weren't that tanky, the Frigid Outskirts would be a lot more fun. And if it was maybe populated with a few more buildings. Because it feels like Gerudo Valley from Ocarina of Time in a way that feels really cool. Saying all of that, you may think that I like Ludden's-Allen because I like Frigid Outskirts, which is an absolute lie. This is a sad excuse for a fight that should be deleted from the game. There was no reason to make two Avas and put them in the same room together. That is about as lazy of boss fights as boss fights go. I do not enjoy Ludden's-Allen, and they feel poor. Ava was fantastic. Two Avas in the same room do not feel fantastic, because it's clear that this boss was never meant to be fought as a duo. Don't put bosses that are not meant to be duo bosses as a duo, because you end up with this tragic garbage. If you haven't noticed, the twin dragon riders are in the same place. Stop doing this crap. It's not fun. Next up is... Give me a second. I'll think of her name. My name can... Oh, God. Why is my head only thinking Medusa? Oh, no. Oh, I can't even remember the boss's name. Give me a second. I'll think of it. I know this sounds like she's going to go into meh tier, but I promised. Maitha. Baneful Queen Maitha. That's what it is. I like Maitha. She's a fun little boss. The windmill mechanic is a little out of the way and a bit weird to drain her poison pool, but Maitha's all right. She's a boss that, like, whenever I remember she's there, it's like, oh yeah, Maitha's coming up. That'll be fun. Except for, of course, that run that I wasn't allowed to use torches, which I never ended up doing anything with, but we might end up making a video out of it at some point. But I had to fight them without torches, and it was certainly an experience. That being said, Maitha's fun. I like her. I don't really have a lot else to say about her other than she's cool and I enjoy the fight. Arena is cool. The fact that she uses the Medusa head as a spell catalyst is cool. The grab is fun. And yeah, that's about it. I like her. A pretty good end to what is normally one of my least favorite areas in Dark Souls 2. Oh boy, Nishandra. It's no surprise that I'm not a big fan of Nishandra. I think Nishandra goes into needs work. She just doesn't have a lot going for her. Her moveset is really simple. She's not very threatening. The only thing that's majorly threatening about her is the fact that she can constantly reduce your max HP, which honestly feels more annoying than it does feel like a fun mechanic to interact with. I think Nishandra is just... I don't know. She's just there. She definitely feels like she needs some help. That being said, lore-wise, she is I feel like Nashandra lore-wise is a much cooler, like, final boss than Gwyn. And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for that, but Nashandra is so cool. Everybody knows that I am an absolute Manus fanboy, and Nashandra being an extension of that lore was done so well. I think that the Nashandra Vendrick story is so cool. And if you disagree with me, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. You could absolutely think Gwyn is cooler. I would not blame you, but listen, I'm a simp for Manus. Not for Nashandra, but I'm a simp for Manus. And I'd love Nashandra's lore. So she's not in the delete tier. I think she's a cool idea for a final boss. Of course, ignoring the secret final boss that is Aldia. But I think she's still, like, I think her fight needs a lot of help. It needs help. So, Old Dragon Slayer, I have to clarify whether or not I feel... we have to clarify whether or not it is Scholar of the First Sin or regular Dark Souls 2. I know I said I wasn't going to quantify the run-up to the boss. I'm going to make one exception to that rule for Old Dragon Slayer. And if you think that makes me hypocritical, then you're right. Congratulations. Anyways, if it is original Dark Souls 2, I think original Dragon Rider is probably in the upper still good tier. If it's Scholar of the First Sin, probably in the lower still good tier. Only because in Scholar of the First Sin, you've got to get through Guardian Dragon, a boss that was intended to be made for mid-late game. If that means you have to fight a mid to late game boss, just essentially toned down a bit, in order to make it to Old Dragon Slayer, that really means that you're probably going to be way too strong by the time you actually encounter this boss. That being said, it's an incredibly fun callback. I remember my first reaction to this boss, I was like, my jaw was on the floor in amazement, and I saw that he was using hexes and dark magic, and I'm like, oh my god, it's corrupted Ornstein. I love him so much. But I don't think he's necessarily he might be a great boss. I don't know. He's definitely in the upper echelon of still good if we're judging the boss fight by himself. I could be convinced he's great. But yeah, Old Dragon Slayer, he's pretty alright. I think the impact of this boss is pretty fun. I don't think he's got a lot more going for him other than, like, he's a really cool boss conceptually, and, like, your first reaction to him is fun. Outside of that, he's a pretty standard fight, though. Next up is going to be the Old Iron King, who's going to join Aldia, the other flaming boss fight, in the meh tier, because I tend to agree with people when they say he feels very video gamey. That being said, I think Old Iron King gets a little too much flack. I think he still can be a somewhat interesting boss. He's definitely a threatening boss. You're always at risk of being hurled into the lava, but I don't know if he's necessarily threatening for good reasons, and that's why I think he's going to go into the meh tier. I really look at Old Iron King visually. I think some people are like, oh, visually, he's like, insert video game boss here. I actually like his visual design. I know I might be the odd one out in that case, but I really like his visual design. The only thing is, I look at Old Iron King and just, I almost get sad because I feel like this boss could be so much more, but he just isn't. Speaking of bosses that could be so much more, but just aren't, Giant Lord, who I'm going to put probably just above the Old Iron King. Giant Lord, from a lore perspective, is really awesome. He's the last giant that is, but in the past. And that's why Last Giant is so angry with you, is because you fought him in the past. That being said, other than the fact that Giant Lord, if you're not spec'd into health or don't have good defenses, can probably hit you for about 1 billion damage, he's not too threatening outside of that. Ranged builds tend to have a super easy time destroying him, and that's probably one of the biggest reasons why he gets bullied so easily during soul farming. Even with melee builds, it's pretty easy to avoid his attacks. He feels like he needs to be more dynamic. I think they wanted to draw a similarity between him and Last Giant, However, I don't feel like he's enough of an evolution of Last Giant to really be quantified as a late game boss in a meaningful way. I think he needed to be given a bit more flair to him, or just he needs something to make him feel a bit more threatening and a bit more grandiose. I want to see the Last Giant at its full potential, and even the way we got him, I don't feel like we got that. Royal Rat Authority. I'm gonna put him in the needs work tier. Some people like to call him Other Sith. I really don't see the similarities between Authority and Sith. Authority and Sith. Wow, I can really speak today. The similarities between Authority and Sith just don't register to me. Like, I get it, they're big four-legged bosses, then it's good to be underneath them. But the similarities beyond that tend to fall apart really quickly. Especially because Sith is a good boss, and this one kinda isn't. I don't know. There's nothing that really excites me about the Royal Rat Authority. He's another one of those bosses that's kind of like gargoyles, where I don't feel like going out of my way to fight him. I just kind of feel like I get to a certain point in the game and go, who do I have to cross off the checklist now? Oh, right, Authority. He exists. He just needs a little bit more love before I feel like he's actually a good boss fight. But the way he is, I don't know. I'm not really a big fan. The Burnt Ivory King. All right, this is where I'm probably going to make some enemies. More than the ones I've already made. I'm really struggling to put Ivory King in the amazing tier. I feel like he needs to go into the great tier. And with him, I think he's actually going to be what pushes Dark Lurker up. The thing about Burnt Ivory King is he has the coolest entrance to any boss fight ever. That 5-on-5 or 5-on-4 or whatever it is with your soldiers versus his soldiers, sealing away the chaos, the jump down into the pit. Everything leading up to the Burnt Ivory King is absolutely S-class. Unfortunately, I feel like actually fighting Burnt Ivory King is a bit boring, actually. I don't really feel a lot when I'm fighting the king himself. He just feels whatever, to be honest. Kind of the things I've been saying with like Lost Sinner, where it kind of feels like a box standard fight. He feels like a generic version of either the Fume Knight or Sir Elon. Like, he feels like he's supposed to be impressive, but I just don't get that from him. That being said, the fight is still super memorable, and I definitely understand why some people may enjoy fighting him. It's more so a personal preference thing that I don't enjoy fighting him, but all of the parts like leading up to his boss fight, including his entrance, just all of the thematics, the actual boss design and concept and visually, the arena is stunning. Just everything about this fight is absolutely awesome, except for the actual fight about the king himself. He's just not quite there to make it into amazing, but he's right on the cusp. And I think because I feel like he's just shy of amazing, but I'd still consider Dark Lurker above him, I think that's what's going to push Dark Lurker to amazing. Speaking of amazing bosses, Sin, the Slumbering Dragon. Sin is a boss that I really enjoy. There are a lot of people who consider Sin to be the greatest boss in the Dark Souls series. I know there's a dragon boss in Dark Souls 3 DLC that I have not fought yet, which I'll be getting to eventually, and I can't speak to that one, but I will say, as for right now, Sin is probably my favorite dragon in Dark Souls, at least the Dark Souls that I've played. I will say that there is a dragon boss in Elden Ring that I really do enjoy, probably more than Sin. But that's not Dark Souls, that's Elden Ring, and I'm not going to say any more than that because I don't want to spoil Elden Ring for the people who haven't played it here yet. That being said, Sin is a very fun boss fight. I think there are times when he can get a bit annoying where he keeps flying out of your reach, but I think that's almost kind of one of those things, kind of like Vendrick, where it works to the boss's advantage. One of the things that makes dragons so terrifying in a medieval setting is they are masters of the sky, and it makes you feel helpless, and it should, because that's what one of the few things that make them so dominant in combat. So yeah, Sin is just really cool. I think I'm gonna move him up just a little bit. I'd say I like Ava more. The Ruin Sentinels. I'd say Ruin Sentinels are pretty great. I like the idea that they are a three-way boss fight. I think they are one of the few quote-unquote gank boss fights that's done really well. It's really fun that you get to start off in a 1v1 and then it slowly devolves into a 1v2 or a 2v2 if you have summons, or even greater than that. I also think that the Rune Sentinels are actually just squishy enough to where it's reasonable to fight them in a multifaceted setting. I think the Rune Sentinels all around are just pretty solid. There's nothing that I can really say about them that pushes them into the amazing tier. They just feel like a really solid gank fight, which I know sounds weird considering how much the community hates gank fights, but I'd say Rune Sentinels does it pretty well. All right. We're going to do both of these at the same time because they're right next to each other and I can say this really easily. Smelter Demon is going into the amazing tier because I think he's awesome. I think he is a fantastic fight and is probably one of the coolest fights in all of Dark Souls 2. Apparently he was so cool that FromSoft felt the need to bring him back. I don't know if I agree with that sentiment. If all we're going to do is bring back Smelter Demon for the sake of bringing back Smelter Demon, then no. I don't think he's as egregious as these three, so he might be at the very bottom of the needs work tier, but I still don't think there was a need for another Smelter Demon. That being said, I understand out of all the bosses why they copy and pasted this one, because Smelter Demon is legitimately a really cool fight. I can't tell you a lot of reasons why I think he's so cool, other than he feels like one of those dance bosses. It's one of those bosses when it feels like you truly have a hold of their boss patterns, that like it ends up becoming this fun interactive dance to where you're weaving your own attacks between theirs in a really fun and interesting way. It feels like everything has a fun response and everything feels calculated in a way that's satisfying. That's what I get off of Smelter Demon. I really love this boss fight. I think Smelter Demon is vastly underestimated and is actually like a peak Dark Souls boss fight. In fact, I'm tempted to put him like up here maybe. Yeah, I think that's a good spot for Smelter Demon. The Rotten is going to go into Still Good, and he's going to sit right next to his buddy, the Duke's Dumb Refrigerator. Not really much I can say about this boss. They're fun, but I don't necessarily look forward to the Rotten, other than as maybe like a sponge to test DPS. I mean, the Rotten's fun. Other than that, his lore is cool. I mean, he's a pretty cool like reincarnation of Nito. I don't really feel anything else about him. His arena's fine, I guess. His moveset's fine, I guess. Everything about him is pretty... I mean, the fight itself is fun, and I like it. And everything else about him is just fine, I guess. And that's, I think, pretty much how I would sum up the Rotten. Next up is the Skeleton Lords. I think the Skeleton Lords actually make for a great early game boss. There's a chance that a lot of you fought him, the Skeleton Lords pretty early on. So you probably feel like they would probably go into one of these lesser tiers, but I actually really like Skeleton Lords. I think that they are really done well in concept. Because even when you're over-leveled, you may get ahead of yourself and kill the bosses too fast and then get overwhelmed by the sheer number of skeletons. So it feels like no matter what level you are, you still have to have some semblance of control when managing the mechanics of this fight. And I think that is I think that speaks to a really well-designed fight. Just something about the Skeleton Lords I think are pretty good. I think they're right on the precipice between still good and great. In fact, I might put them above Rune Sentinels. Yeah, I'm probably going to put them there. just everything about this boss fight is, I don't know. It's one of those fights that I really like. They're really memorable. And I think that even when you're over leveled, you still have to track the boss fight in a way that feels intuitive. So all around, a solid A- from me on these guys. Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. Now, I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, and I totally could be wrong, and if I am, I'm sorry. But if I remember correctly, I think this is Press Continue's least favorite boss in the whole game. And I think it's really funny because I actually kind of like them. I don't think they're amazing or great or anything like that. I don't even know if I'd put them as still good. They might be just meh. Because by the time I get to them, I usually just annihilate them. But I think it's really funny that some people, and he's not alone. There's a lot of people that hate this boss fight. I think they're whatever, to be honest. I think in concept, they're really cool. It's just kind of unfortunate that by the time you get to them, if you're doing an all bosses run, you kind of just obliterate them. And there's not much more to it than that. But I do think that they are a fun boss fight. I think having to manage their health bars so that way you kill them together is an interesting mechanic. Some people may think of it as annoying, but I think it's interesting. And I think lore-wise, they make a lot of sense as to where they are in the game. They are the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender. I wish that they were named and had a little bit better lore. They feel more like a proof of concept than they do a fully fledged boss, but as a boss fight, they're still functional enough. But they are pretty forgettable. I don't forget them, but they border on being forgettable. All right, last two, and the last two are bangers. We got Velstadt, otherwise known as Bellstat, who's either going to go into, I think I'm going to put Velstadt in great. He just needs a little something more to really push him into amazing. I think he's still a really fun boss. I think his lore is fantastic. I think the fight is fun, but he just needs a little more help. I don't know. There's something about him, I think, that just needs an extra little something to really push him into the amazing tier. He's not quite there for me. I think maybe if his phase 2, it felt like the whole dark magic idea was played into a little further into his phase 2, then I would enjoy him more. But overall, Velstadt's, he's just not quite there. That being said, I still really like him. Even without that little bit of something, I think he's still a fight that I enjoy doing every time. But I don't necessarily go, man, I really want to fight Velstadt right now. That being said, there are definitely days where I say to myself, man, I really want to fight Looking Glass Knight right now. Probably my favorite boss in the base game. Right next to Smelter Demon for favorite boss in base game. They're pretty comparable. And Ava sits kind of in that same trio as well. Looking Glass Knight is just a really cool boss. This awesome fight between two knights in the rain. The first knight of many that is guarding the path to his king. The knight that's left behind at the castle. The shield that deflects magic and can summon spirits from the beyond. Looking Glass Knight is just cool. I can't even say if I really know his lore, but something about his fight is just so fun and scenic. Like, there's something so movie-like about his fight. It's just so cool looking. It feels like a proper duel between two knights. Now, when he summons a spirit, that might break it a little bit, but overall, I really like Looking Glass Knight. I think he is a very well done fight. A lightning knight that fights you in the middle of the rainstorm atop this dark, abandoned castle. It's just, everything about it is so thematic and awesome. And now we've got everybody into their proper places. I don't know how long it's been for you, but for me, it's been just under an hour and a half. Oh boy. Let's go ahead and quickly switch this up a bit. I'll be really quick and probably going to edit a bit. And there we have it. The individual tiers might be rearranged a little bit, like who stands where and what tier might get arranged depending on the day and how I'm feeling. But I think pretty consistently, I'd feel like these are the tiers that I feel all of these bosses would fit in. For those of you who might be just listening and are not staring at a tiny screen with a bunch of portraits, I'll go ahead and name all this off for you one final time. In the delete tier, at the bottom, we have Lud and Zolin, followed by Twin Dragon Riders, Prowling Magus and Congregation, and Blue Smelter Demon. In the needs work tier, sitting at the bottom, we have Covetous Demon, followed by Royal Rat Authority, Ancient Dragon, Royal Rat Vanguard, and then Nashandra. Just above that, we have the Meh tier, which starts off with Guardian Dragon into Demon of Song, the Belfry Gargoyles, Old Iron King, Giant Lord, Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin, and the Throne Watcher and Defender, which is then preceded by the Still Good tier, which we get started off by the Lost Sinner, then King Vendrick, the Last Giant, Flexibile Sentry, Old Dragon Slayer, Baneful Queen Maitha, the Rotten, Duke's Dear Freya, and the Gank Squad. Which then leads us into the Great tier, which is where we really start to hit bosses that I love to fight, which are the Ruin Sentinels, the Skeleton Lords, Alana the Squalid Queen, Scorpioness Nazca, the Dragon Rider, Velstadt, Burnt Ivory King, and the Executioner's Chariot, which will end up being the gatekeeper for the Amazing tier, which would be my top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bosses, which would be from bottom to top, the Dark Lurker, the Pursuer, Sin the Slumbering Dragon, the Looking Glass Knight, the Smelter Demon, Ava the King's Pet, Sir Elon, and the Fume Knight. And there you go. There's a couple places where you could switch out a boss here and there to kind of rearrange the order, but for the most part, I think this is as accurate as we're gonna get. And I think this looks pretty good. I'd love to know what you guys think about these bosses. I know that a lot of people really hate Dark Souls 2, and if you do, that's fine, but I really want to know what you guys think about Dark Souls 2 bosses. Is this going to be like Dark Souls 1, where I was absolutely flamed for thinking Bed of Chaos should be deleted, or do you guys, for the most part, agree with me on this one? I think there's probably a few bosses on here that I might get flamed for, but honestly, I'm ready to take it, because I know my opinions are weird. I'm turning into Bad Take Weekend, and it is what it is. But I think I've kept you guys here long enough. If you guys are still here, sitting at the end of this video and are still hearing this, thank you guys so much for sitting all the way through this video. I know it's a long one, and I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to sit and listen to me ramble on about Dark Souls 2 for so long. I just want to thank you guys for just being an absolutely amazing audience. There are so many people that will often watch these hour-plus videos all the way to the end, and to all of you that sit through these videos, whether you're going at double speed or not, or you're kind of skipping through, it doesn't even really matter to me. If you're one of those people that tends to make it to the end of these videos, I just want to let you know that you are an absolute champion, and I am super thankful for all of the time that we've gotten to spend together. So honestly, thank you so much for everything you do. But that's enough for the sappy nonsense. If you guys did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, bop that subscribe button, and ring tingling that little bell to be notified whenever I drop another video. You can also join the Discord and make your own tier list. Links are in the description below, and by all means, make your own tier list. There should be a From Software discussion tab that you can go ahead and dump your tier list into. I absolutely want to see what kind of crazy stuff you guys come up with. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. And I'll catch you gamers on the flip side. Later.